want to talk about today is the gang stalking aspect of the case. Talking about the British paedophile ring that was running in the British care system, and as a result of the mother having the child returned to her, not only was occult practices being used against her, but also included in that, seems intrinsic with the occult practice that go on, was gang stalking, which maybe some people are not familiar with because it tends to be separated from occult practices, but really they seem to work together. Another name for it is targeted individuals. In that sense, yes, we were targeted individuals in that all our correspondence was interfered with. When we moved house, all the bills were problematic. So you would tell them our names, but they'd come back with the wrong name on, so we'd need to do it again and repeat the process of simple practices. Registration of things also the same. And this wasn't just like, oh, okay, just the water bill. It was every bill. So the electric bill, the gas bill, the rent, every aspect, benefits, every aspect was interfered with. The phones, as I say, were tapped. My phones were tapped since 1996, made clear to me, and they continued to be tapped and again interfered with, so the messages wouldn't come, or people would claim they never got the messages. And I suppose it's all to do with making you aware that you are being watched, to make you into sort of an anxious state, maybe a paranoid state. With regards to the gang stalking, it seems to be that natural things that would normally occur are used. So it might be like that you go out and everywhere you go, people are doing the same cough, so they may go and the next person you see will go the same. And if you try to explain that to someone in general public, they would think they know that's just normal, that's, you know, people coughing. You need to see that it's done repeatedly, so it's natural things that occur, but it's unnatural that it's happening everywhere. So if you walk to the shops and back, it would happen constantly on the way. I've later since found out that people, yes, are paid to actually go and do this, and they are gang stalkers. The purpose of it, I suppose, is again to show we're around, and as well, when you keep having something repeatedly done, like the coughing, in the end, if someone does naturally cough, you still think that's part of it, and you become hyper aware of the coughing going on, or sneezing, or just simple gestures that people could dismiss. But if you tried to express it, you would look paranoid. It's like it's a strategy that they repeat something until you notice it. So, in a sense, you could say, right, okay, well, as soon as you notice it, let them know, but then they would do something new once you notice it. But then that antic is, therefore, you're expecting to see it in life, and when it does occur, even naturally, you will associate it with the harassment. Now, normally when this happens, I've since learned that it happens to people when they're on their own. And I suppose it's done to isolated people and to keep them isolated. Because of this happening and because of all the other aspects that were happening in our life, we tend to be together most of the time. But on certain occasions, we would be separate. When this was the case, then say if I went out and she was alone in the house, then for certain, always, someone would be knocking, whether it was Jehovah's Witness or the electric man to read the meter, but someone would knock. Not with no big issues, just to show that, yes, we recognise that Louise has gone out. If the mother went out, then again she would have the coughing, the sneezing, whatever antics that was being used, and it'd be the same one used constantly all that time, and then they may change it to a different one. This was never done in front of me, so if she was to express it, a normal person would be told, no, that's not the case. But because I worked so closely with her, I was aware that, no, she was expressing something that was really going on. Also, if she was to get on a bus, people would come and talk to her on the bus, and she was quite a sociable person, and when they spoke to her, gradually they would let it gradually be known that they're involved in the same thing. And so it was to sort of, I think, stop the sociability of the person. Also this sort of not only included all the statutory services, as we've already, I've told you in previous videos that I've made, but also it included the emergency services. And I'll give you an example. Is once New Year's Eve, I just popped out, and then she said that the ambulance service arrived and knocked at the door and said, oh, ambulance. And she said, no, no one requires an ambulance here. But she didn't open the door. And they said, oh, you know, that someone has called the ambulance. Again, she was on her own. Another time, I don't know how it was meant to be, but she popped out and the fire brigade knocked. And we'd moved premises and we didn't have landlines because there's so much interference, there was no point. And the fire brigade turned up with sirens blaring and knocked and said, oh, that there'd been a report that the house was on fire, and they'd traced the call to our house. So I said, no, we don't have a landline, so I don't quite know how you traced the call to our house. And they asked, could they come in and verify that we didn't have a landline? So I said, yes, you could. So again, it's like, I reminded them, you know, someone's house is on fire. Another time, we just drove to the shop locally, and we'd only gone about 5 minutes. I went to the shop, and when I come out, the police were lined up with my car and speaking to the mother, and I come along and asked her, you know, what was the problem, and they said, oh, they'd had a call that the mother was looking distressed in the car, so they come to see if she was okay. So that was very nice of them, very fast service, and kept repeating, are you sure you're not distressed? You sure you're not distressed? She wasn't distressed. So again, it's to show, yes, we're everywhere and in everything that you do. After a few years, because this went on and on and on for years and years, they brought in youths and children to also be part of the gang stalking. And again, when she was out on her own, they'd call her names and throw stones at her. And the thing is, she's a black woman, and we was in a white suburban area where really, in truth, racism holds that, oh, the white people are a bit wary of black people. But it didn't seem to have a problem for these youths. They still continued to sort of throw things at her. She went to another area with another friend of mine, as a black friend, and there they threw snowballs at her. My friend couldn't believe, because they both looked like women that you don't really want to mess with, but there you go, they were throwing snowballs at them. Another aspect of this that I haven't really got into, but I will in the future, is the mother is actually a professional singer and had music in the charts and done a few world tours. She therefore needed to practice. Okay, she wasn't singing at that time, wasn't able to with all this harassment going on, but she needed to practice every day to keep her vocal cords stretched and so forth. But this was made into an issue by the neighbours, because as well the neighbours were part of the harassment. It seemed they were nice to me, very nice to me, and quite rude to her, but in front of me they wouldn't be rude to her. And once she's pointed that out to me, then I sort of started to ignore them, because I thought, well, if you can be rude to her and not to me, I don't really want no part of that. But they continued to be nice to me even though I ignored them. Now this issue of her needing to practice singing escalated to the point where the neighbours complained about her singing and the noise. And yes, she has a large vocal sound, but obviously she needs to practice. In the day she had practiced. So it escalated to the point where they complained, and they complained to environmental health. Environmental health came round and said that they would take the equipment away. I don't quite know how they'd take the equipment away, but they said they would. She still continued singing because she knew this was her profession. She was being harassed outside, so to stay in, she wanted to continue doing her singing. So then letters came threatening that she would receive an ASBO if she didn't stop singing. She continued singing. And they never did actually bring the ASBO forward. But like in all of this case, there was threats always of legal implications, but they never were followed through. One day she was singing downstairs and I came downstairs. As I say, things weren't really done in front of me. And she was singing and I saw that children were throwing stones at our living room window. So I opened the window and asked them, excuse me, what do you think you're doing? And they said, oh, she's mad, isn't she? And look at her. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, she sings all the time. And I said, well, that's because she's a singer. Anyway, they backed off because I was in. And then a few days later, I walked down the road from the shops and I saw the youth. They were only children, like maybe 10 to 12-year-olds. And they used to hang around outside the house a few doors away, but then harass the mother when she was singing. So I spoke to them and I asked them, you know, what was the problem? And they said, well, you know, it's her singing. And I said, well, you know, singing's good though, isn't it? And so they said, no. So I said, well, she has had chart records, so someone must like the tune. But they didn't really want to entertain that. So I focused more on them and said, you know, what would they like to do with their lives? And they said they wanted to be footballers. But there they were, smoking their cigarettes. So I said to them, no, that wouldn't really help them, and maybe they shouldn't be there, but practicing their football so that they could become what they wanted to be. After that occasion, because I thought best to make friends with these youth, whenever they saw me, they'd run away. So they were scared of my niceness for some reason. There was also helicopters every night. You'd hear helicopters. You could say, well, you know, helicopters do go over. But every night we'd hear the helicopters, I'd just like to point out. And also we'd hear gunshots every night. And we lived in suburbia, and this is England, so we don't tend to have guns. But we'd hear them every night. And then in around 2007, I managed to get onto the internet. And then I saw a video on YouTube that was calling it gang stalking, and it was like, oh, I recognise that, but I could see that people have problems trying to express what it is because it's just natural things that could be dismissed as just normal. I believe the purpose of it is to isolate the person and to get them to stay in their house, and then once in their house is to suffocate their spirit, really. Stay in your house and shut up. I didn't receive any of this sort of harassment, only the phone interception and the mail interception. But I came to learn through time that there was a thing called trauma-based mind control. And what I learned was that the mother was from that experience. She was mind-controlled MK Ultra that people may be familiar with, and so was the child, being trained for that when we got her back from care. I learned later. And therefore the antics that the people were doing in the streets were actually triggers that were used whilst trauma was being carried out in the past. They repeated the same antic again and again during a trauma, and therefore at a later stage, like now, when I suppose the slave is moving away, they activate the emotion by keep doing the same trigger signal. There was no point doing that to me because I'm not MK Ultra slave. This is where we're at. Also recently, so I will go on to the mind control aspect of things, but in the next video. Also recently, when I was looking in my car, or sweeping my car, I went into where the seatbelt slots into the pocket when it's folded away, and I was sweeping away a little bit of glass from a few years ago when someone smashed into the window of the car, and I found a listening device. I'll show you. It was hidden. It was hidden in the seatbelt holder, and I wouldn't have normally found it. I don't know how long it was there, but little bits of glass were on the carpet, so I think it was recently placed in. This is the device. I don't know if you can see. Some people say it looks like a button, but I have spoken to other people that know about such things, and they say it looks like a hearing aid piece. Apparently the battery is that large, so it lasts as long. It had a wire sticking out from it, and it's magnetic, so it was holding on to the side of the car in that department. So obviously they still want to listen to me, even though this case, in a sense, ended 2006, but obviously hasn't. So that's the gang stalking aspect dealt with now. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.